Motec, there's obviously a lot of races going on that are going to be decided June 7th. Would you agree that the most important one here locally would be the district attorney's race?
Yeah, the most definitely. That's going to be a huge one, especially number one. It's the top law enforcement position in the county, and there are many ramifications politically with races beneath that one. So I would say most definitely, because the district attorney really sets the pace for so many things in the community, from, as we've seen with Tori Verber, she's used her office to go after political prosecutions, right? We saw that where she was using all resources and coming out with serious allegations towards elected officials that panned out not to be true. No convictions were ever followed through on as far as the allegations that she was making and the charges that she was filing. And then we've personally seen instances where there were corrupt elected officials that she did nothing about. She did not, to our knowledge, follow through on an investigation regarding individuals involved in Reinvent Stockton, and their control of the SUSD board, as well as using their positions on the Stockton City Council. Or elected officials interfering with using their elected positions, like Assembly Member Susan Eggman using her elected office, her staff using her elected office in Assembly to interfere with the jobs of private citizens. Things of that nature, never investigated, never followed through on. So this is a extremely important election.
One of the issues that we've talked off camera about, and I'm not sure, I think more and more people are starting to understand it. Certainly a lot of the, I would say, legitimate protesters in Stockton understand it. What do you think voters should understand about the significance of the relationship that Tori had with Sammy Nunes, and how that was impacting protesting in Stockton?
Well, I mean, that's a prime example where you have, and you see it not only with Tori Verber and our district attorney's office, but you really see these tactics being used throughout the state and in other cities across the nation, where just recently Bobby Bivens used his position to put out some manufactured concern of making it seem like Ron Freitas was somehow racist because of a case that happened back in 2009, which was, regarding juror selection. And that seems a little bit disingenuous to me, because I remember Tori Verber's record, right? I remember the fact that, for instance, in this letter, first of all, they're trying to reference George Floyd and the tragedy that happened in Minnesota that set off national protests dealing with Black Lives Matter, dealing with police brutality, the justice system, how law enforcement officers are prosecuted or not prosecuted, which goes up to district attorney's offices. And I remind people that, over 30 people have been killed by police here in Stockton and San Joaquin County. The great majority of them have been Mexican and Black. And Tori Verber has done nothing to bring justice towards the families. Now, I'm not saying all of those cases were justified or unjustified, but you have not seen her go after, prosecute any officer for wrongdoing, other than the one occurrence that happened when a white woman was killed by a police officer in Ripon. And that police officer was not from our county, he was from Stanislaus County. But what about the several dozen instances where we've had, for instance, George Floyd was strangled or asphyxiated, right? Not strangled, but to be more correct, he was asphyxiated, died live on camera. That's what set off such, unrest. But we have a similar case here in Stockton with Avelino Cordova, where Stockton police killed this individual whose crime was not properly stopping at the stop sign when he was getting off work at Eldorado Market, and you had a Mexican individual who was strangled, asphyxiated, I should say, by Stockton police officers, and we had the former sheriff Steve Moore, according to the former medical examiner, Dr. Bennett Amalu, said that he was pressured to change the findings from a homicide to accidental in that case. Why is Tori Verber and Bobby Bivens, why are they not talking about Abelino Cordova, but they want to mention George Floyd, who they incorrectly in the letter refer to as George Ford, so they couldn't even get his name right, and they're acting like they're concerned about him. Why is nobody talking about James Rivera, and why the fact that he was killed as a 16-year-old, shot several times from the rear, had no weapon on him. The story that the police officers told the public that day back in 2011, I believe it was, did not pan out, which even a federal judge has ruled in court. And you have the mother, Dion Smith, still fighting a decade later to get documentation, to get evidence, to get belongings of her son that was killed, James Rivera. Why is Tori Verber not talking about that? But she wants to talk about George Floyd.
Yes, she wants to talk about George Floyd, and there is a systematic approach to make sure that the conversations or the protests stay on George Floyd. But going back to Abelino Cordova, I think this is really important because you brought up the point that in the case of George Floyd, which was in Minneapolis, which is the case that Tori loves to talk about, it was it was a homicide caused by asphyxiation. Abelino Cordova, as you point out, while different circumstances, but ultimately this was a Mexican national who died by asphyxiation by the police. The medical coroner, Dr. Amalo, he considered this quite strongly and was positive about it, that it was a homicide. And yet Sheriff Steve Moore switched the cause of death to accidental. And then when he got caught, or knew he was going to get caught, he switched it back to homicide. So Tori's office said that she was going to investigate this. To this day, nothing has happened. Clearly, I'm not prepared to say that the officers were right or wrong in that case, but I'll tell you what, the way that Sheriff Steve Moore, who was stripped of, people need to remember, he got stripped of his coroner badge,
which was a huge deal, and
even because of cases like this.
What the LA Times and I believe the Washington Post even covered this. So this was something that was not, a small decision to make.
No.
And as a result of the voters being more educated through 209 Times, Steve Moore is now gone. Right, so now I see
trying to run for supervisor.
Well, he's gone from the position of sheriff, which was a huge win for the community. So now the community needs to follow up and replace Tori Verber as the district attorney. I have not forgotten how her office spent over a year investigating a woman for selling ceviche on Facebook. That to me, when we're in a city that has one of the highest crime rates in the state and in the nation, that you're going to waste resources on somebody selling ceviche to
bizarre.
Willing participants over Facebook in a law for something that's not even against the law at this point, right? So
the law got changed.
We have a whole bunch of George Floyds here in Stockton, California. It's disingenuous, and it's a specific tactic that our local elected officials will try to make themselves sound like they care about the Mexican and black and brown and black communities.
Are you saying that this was virtue signaling on the part of Tori to to talk about George Floyd while not talking about cases that she actually could influence?
I'm saying it's straight up hypocrisy, right? Don't talk to me about George Floyd, but you're not talking about Abelino Cordova. You're not talking about James Rivera. You're not talking about Champ Brown. You're not talking about the several dozens other incidences that have happened here in Stockton, California, because why? She has a role to play in those cases. So she's going to talk about a case in Minnesota that she has zero authority over, but all of the cases that she has here in town, she has nothing to say.
As you know, I sat down with both Dion Smith and Denise Friday. Dion is the mother of James Rivera Jr., Denise Friday, the mother of Colby Friday. And I was both fascinated and horrified when they both reiterated that while Tori, I think it was back in 2016, was the first time she did it, she publicly apologized to Dion about, she said that we have tortured you. This was at an NAACP meeting. We have tortured you. We apologize. We did you wrong, et cetera, et cetera. There was an understanding at that point. Matter of fact, Melinda Meza, KCRA 3, said, that there's an expectation that Tori's going to follow up with a meeting to give Dion, the grieving mother, there was videotape evidence that she's been asking to see, a 911 tape, juvenile hall records, and some kind of a police report. To this day, the city's already settled. They gave
in both cases.
Yeah, both those cases are settled. But Tori has yet, although she publicly apologized and said, "I'm sorry for torturing you," or "we tortured you," she has refused, once the cameras were off, to actually meet with Dion and give her these documents. Now, I personally have called Tori on behalf of Dion and said, "Listen, despite whatever the facts of the case, number one, you have to recognize that Federal Judge England did state that the physical evidence in the case and the officer's statements." I'm very pro-officer, but the federal judge stated that the physical evidence and the officer's statements didn't appear to reconcile with each other.
Because they didn't, and that is the legal way of saying somebody's lying.
Well,
as I interpret it, right? Because both cannot be true. And that's what the public forgets a lot of time, is that there are major red flags in a lot of these cases, including Colby Friday. And you have so many cases that have been settled by the city of Stockton in a civil court, but yet nothing has been done in a criminal court, right?
$3.25 million in the Colby Friday case, $395,000 in Dion's case. And I think something that's important to point out is, and the ladies, they wanted to make this very clear, they know that these cases are fully settled. They are not, they've been protesting in the streets for years. They're not protesting for money. The money is over with. And Dion was very clear that she actually never wanted to take the money. It was her
lawyer, John Burris, who was pretty much forced that settlement and said, "Take it or I'm off the case."
Yeah, and
according to what she told me. And that's what people don't understand, the business of this, right? There are lawyers that are making money off these cases. There are disingenuous district attorneys like Tori Verber. There's disingenuous individuals like Bobby Bivens that are then used by these elected officials and these political machines to promote their agenda, give them cover. I've been in the streets protesting with Dion Smith and several other families here in Stockton that have been affected by violence and specifically when it comes to the Stockton Police Department, that I remind the public, between the years of 2014 and 2019, had the 6th worst record in the entire nation for killing of citizens per capita. They were the 2nd worst department in the state of California, behind Bakersfield PD. So these are not just some things that people look at and misinterpret, or these serious issues and concerns were backed up by data. And what you have is a move by political machines to come in and try to redirect the energy of the protests in the streets. They
were tone setters.
And
that's what Sammy Nunez was, right?
They pay sellouts like Scammy Nunez and Bobby Bivens, and they'll pay these individuals to say, "Look, don't go out and protest and shut down City Hall or anything like that. We want you instead to get people to go this direction, and get people not to protest. Have a family day in the park and pass out some hot dogs and some whatever, right? They don't want to seek the real answers and change the system. Instead, what's happening is they're literally being paid and being co-opted by the system to protect the system.
Well, literally, we're at the 2-year mark for George Floyd, and what I think is fascinating about when you go back and you peel back the onion, when Tori was chanting in the streets, "No justice, no peace," and she was making political points by pandering.
And I was there. It was right. It was
Yeah.
on Pacific Avenue. Traffic was shut down to the mall. The entrances were shut down to the mall. I was there, and again, I take that as somebody who gave her a chance to say, "Here goes somebody who wants to make a change." But here we are several years later, and as somebody who has been an activist for the majority of my life, I expect follow through. I expect more than just political games and posturing. And I have not seen, the families have not seen any follow through on Tori Verber's part to reopen cases, to hold officers accountable, that the city has paid out time and time again, including the officer that I got fired for targeting me and coming to my home in the middle of the night to do something, give me an illegal ticket that I took not just as a ticket, but as a threat. Right. That officer was fired. But where were the criminal charges for what he did? He abused the system, looked up my address through the system, came to my home in the middle of the night. There could have been a violent confrontation if I saw somebody lurking around my car in the middle of the night and I came out to defend my property. Who holds those individuals accountable? That person is the district attorney. And Tori Verber, for 8 years now, has failed to hold anybody accountable in these cases.
Well, it's an interesting line that Tori plays, because on one hand, she says that she's a Republican. On the other hand, part of her brand is that she's the most progressive DA in the state. And then then when you actually talk to people like Dion, who is still waiting for a callback, and all she's asking for, I think is really important, and this is one of the reasons I really have a lot of respect for Dion. Number one, I think the public needs to know she's not receiving a dime. There is a Black Lives Matter global network that there's been a lot of controversy.
I think they have $92 million in assets right now.
They have not given Stockton BLM one penny.
Well, the thing,
but Tori's organization, Prosecutors Alliance, she's getting money from Tides Foundation, which is a fiscal sponsor of both BLM Global Network and Prosecutors Alliance and Reinvent South Stockton Corporation. So there's a financial triangle between Tori, the national BLM Global Network, Reinvent South Stockton Corporation, but Dion, who is a grieving mother and represents Black Lives Matter Stockton, she hasn't received one penny from that machine, that political machine. And secondly, more importantly, let me ask you, how can Tori justify this many years later? She's literally apologizing and hugging Dion while the cameras are rolling, and then never follows through with giving her documents that are declassified. The case is over with. There are no criminal charges pending. The civil case is over. How can she justify not releasing those documents to Dion?
I think it's for political reasons, and I think that they know when those documents do become available, it's going to tell a different story, and the finger is going to be pointed back at Tori Verber and say, why, even though this case was settled in a civil manner, in a civil court, why were there never charges? And I think that's the real concern there. And I think that it's important to understand that, Dion Smith and a lot of these families, a lot of these activists, they became activists by necessity. They didn't seek to be protesters or activists. They did it out of necessity, and they had been doing it before there was ever an organization called Black Lives Matters. So even though they refer to themselves as Black Lives Matter Stockton chapter, they really have no affiliation with the organization. it's more so
They're really organic.
being in solidarity with the concept to say the lives of black people matter
Correct.
and should be treated equally as every other citizen, and that is the real measuring stick there. But what's happened is, you know, you mentioned Tori's a Republican. That party definitely has its issues with the justice system, but I'm a Democrat myself, a registered Democrat, and I'll be the first to admit so does the Democratic Party, because what you have happen is it all comes down to political control, and they co-opt these organizations, they use them as a political tool, as an auxiliary that trickles down into these communities, and it's all about the flow of money. It goes down to the nonprofits that are disingenuous to their directors, and then they are basically working for the system to protect the system. And we've seen time and time again the reforms that are needed to change the system, improve it, make it better, make it more equitable, make it more just. That's really what protesters are asking for. And what we see is people like District Attorney Tori Verber and the Tides Foundation and Prosecutors Alliance. They have a political agenda that is co-opting and superseding the needs of the community and the people. And that's something that I cannot tolerate or stay quiet by. And that is one of the main reasons why I feel it's time for Tori Verber to lose her position as the district attorney.
You know, it's really a fascinating situation that we have with Tori, because the police officer associations, which people would classify as being politically to the right, they originally supported her. They have now left her in droves. Every police officer association in San Joaquin County is vehemently against Tori, and they're supporting her challenger, Ron Freitas, openly. Number two, the DA's office, the actual subordinates that Tori supervises, they've done a vote of no confidence against Tori. And then on top of this, now we have activists like Dion Smith, who are complaining that Tori hasn't followed through on her promises. So, and then every assembly member, Republican to Democrat, that covers this area, Heath Flora, Republican, Carlos Villapudua, Democrat. Who's the other?
I think Jim Cooper.
Okay, and Jim Cooper. Okay, so they cover this area. All three of them, bipartisan support now, supporting Ron Freitas. Do you think that we've reached an awakening where people are realizing that Tori's talking on both sides of her mouth to the point that, I mean, what is this?
I've seen it myself. I've seen it myself, and I'm not a fan of the Stockton Police Officers Association for several reasons, because they also have their own interests, right? So I want to be clear on that. But I think,
and this is where we divest, by the way, because I'm a SPOA supporter myself.
And I have friends that are police officers. I support them, and I support the profession. But I think that organization and some leadership that it's had in the past has worked against the community, which is why I say that. And people sometimes misinterpret that to say like, Motec is anti-police or Motec is against the police, and that's just not true. I have several buddies and people that I respect highly that are police officers, so I want to be clear on that. But I do have differences with that organization, because I think they also have their own special interests. But I think it does speak volumes when even they and the Black Lives Matter chapter of Stockton, they refer to themselves as that. They have no affiliation with the Democrat-controlled organization. Her own employees and several of these high-profile elected officials all agree that Tori Verber has not been a positive for this community.
Impact Republicans unendorsed of San Joaquin. They unendorsed Tori, which is.
And she's a Republican, so again, that speaks volumes. So, I think it's time for a change. Stockton, Lodi, Manteca. There's an important election that's coming up, June 7th. A lot of people is flying under the radar for it because it's June 7th in an off-presidential election. A lot of times, historically, there's low voter turnouts, but this is going to be a very important election. If you have not already turn in your vote by mail ballot. Make sure to go to the polls on June 7th, because this is for the future of our community. We've already taken out corrupt sheriffs. We've already taken out corrupt mayors, school board members, city council members, you name it, county supervisors. Now it's time for a new district attorney.
Well, I completely agree with you 100%. It's time for a new DA. I'm personally very supportive of Ron Freitas. It's fascinating as we talk. People know us as you're not just a Democrat. You're actually was a delegate for Bernie Sanders, right?
Correct.
And me, Republican grape grower, former law enforcement. So, what's interesting about us, and I think one of the things that our audience appreciates, we literally are on opposite sides of the political spectrum on national subjects, but when we start to talk about local issues, more often than not, we're often in agreement. And I think the commonality that we find is we don't like politicians that talk on both sides of their mouth, such as Tori, and we both want a better community, a safer community, and we want the public to have trust in the institutions, and I think right now we have a situation where there's never been a lower level of trust in the San Joaquin County District Attorney's Office, to the point that even the district attorneys, the deputy district attorneys, they don't trust Tori's leadership. So yeah, absolutely. June 7th, vote for Ron Freitas. We have a 209 Times editorial board. We're in 100% agreement. Everybody that's on the team wants Tori out. So anyway, June 7th, Ron Freitas for district attorney, and let's send Tori packing.
I agree.
All right. Thanks for watching us, everybody. Let us know what you think in the comments below.